And so there's some good programs. I'm sure somebody learned something at Clemson. I don't know what. All right, well, I'm Mark Vitner, and I'm Managing Director and Senior Economist at Wells Fargo Securities, and I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was actually born in Atlanta. My family are native Atlantans going back a few generations, and most of my family still lives here, but so I do get back to Atlanta quite a bit. I did my undergraduate work in economics at the University of Georgia, which at the time was one of the best monetarist programs in the country. It was I studied under Richard Timberlake. I was and actually stayed an extra quarter just so I could have him as a professor. He was one of Milton Friedman's top students, at least according to Milton Friedman's memoirs. And so, that was very fortuitous because I wound up landing a job at Barnett Banks as an economic analyst, and the chief economist at Barnett Banks was John Godfrey, who was a University of Georgia alum, and he'd come to the University of Georgia to ask if they had anybody that they could recommend to him. He was looking for somebody that could write and had an interest in economics, a strong interest in economics. And he was looking for somebody that only had an undergraduate degree, not a graduate degree. And at the time, I thought I was going to go to, I was accepted to go to the Duke's PhD program, so I was had my heart set on going to Duke, but I thought, well, this makes sense. I can defer my enrollment, go work at Barnett in the field a little bit, and that 2-year plan worked out to be about a 9-year plan because Barnett sent me to Carnegie Mellon, where they had an advanced training program in economics, which was a program for folks who work in economics in the business sector. It was more industrial based than banking based, however, and it doesn't exist anymore. But it was a great program. Learned a lot from it. I then went to graduate school at the University of Florida, which was about 90 miles away from my home in Jacksonville. So I would commute there and back. Did that part time, and then also went to the University of North Florida and got an MBA. Did all of that in the span of about 9 years at Barnett Bank, I kind of sensed the way that the banking world was changing, that it was time for me to make a change, and I went to First Union, which was in Charlotte. First Union was a bit unique in that they were starting an investment bank from the ground up. They were building an investment bank, and they were looking for an economist to create more content to get in front of customers. And so I started there at First Union. First Union eventually became Wells Fargo, became Wachovia. Wachovia stumbled going into the Great Recession and became Wells Fargo. And so, but I've essentially been in that investment bank operation for the last 26 years, but it's taken on different roles that were different from a traditional investment bank and that were paired up with a commercial bank. And so we actually service all aspects of the company. The first day that I came to work at Barnett Bank was June 30th, 1984. That was the day that Sun Bank and Trust Company Bank of Georgia announced their merger. Interstate banking would take effect 1 year later, but they knew it would take about a year for the merger to actually be consummated. But that was announced then. So interstate banking was the first big change in the banking world. We saw this massive consolidation, which was not good news for bank economists. When I would go to our professional organization, the International Association of Business Economics, and I'd go to the annual meetings, there were lots of bank economists. And at the low point, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, we could fit around one table. I mean, there just weren't that many bank economists. But that's taken a turn for the better. We've seen that economic staffs have increased, and we're not seeing as much additional consolidation. I think the next big move has been that we've seen more people push into investment banking and push into more non-traditional banking lines. The most recent changes have been twofold. One has been the compression on margins, which is causing banks to really focus on reducing non-interest expense, which is what an economist would be and what research would be. And so really good economics departments are aligning themselves more closely with parts of the bank that are generating revenue. Our job is not to sell our job is really to deepen banking relationships, and so I think that's been a big shift in our focus over the 25 years it's been at Wells. And I'd say that the next big thing is the emergence of fintech, and that too. I mean, economists are having to change the way they do things and develop more content for the web, and find ways to deepen customer relationships over the web, which is very challenging because it's very hard to hold anybody's attention on the web because it's so easily to click onto something else.
Netflix forever. If you're doing that, though, you're not consuming something else. And so I think that there's a lot more online competition. You see this in professional sports, where the attendance, professional sports and college sports, where attendance is struggling because competition from TV viewing is so great, and the TVs are so cheap, and they're so good. You know, it's just incredible. I think that's one of the things that's holding down inflation. The other is that the cost of price discovery has dropped to zero. You can find the best price of a good or service, whatever it is, in seconds. And so if I need to have my gutters replaced, I can find the very best price.
You know, and it's interesting because I don't think I used the phrase "this time is different," and I did read the book, Rogoff's book, and one of the takeaways that I came away from that book was one of the things that I've always told people: every time is different. I mean, there's always some similarities, but there's always things that are different. And the one thing that's not different, though, is that the business cycle is still the business cycle. We will have a recession at some point, but there are some very unusual things that have happened in this cycle, which I think will have lengthened the cycle, and they may mute some of the effects of the next recession. I think it might make it milder and shorter than your typical recession. And a lot of that has to do with technology. I think technology has made the labor market more efficient, in that employers are looking for workers before workers are looking for jobs, because of the prevalence of online job search platforms, and LinkedIn is kind of the most notable of those. But also the whole idea that folks are putting so much of their IT on the cloud means they don't have to build their own IT centers, they don't have to staff up as much, they use more contractors, they don't have to build as big an office space. And so there's been it really lined up well coming out of the Great Recession, that it helped businesses adopt a more conservative mindset in terms of employment growth and capital outlays. And so we're not extended. We haven't built too much office space. Car sales have rarely been above their long-run replacement demand. We haven't built too many homes or too many apartments. So it's really those parts of the economy account for all of the drop during a recession. Collectively, consumer spending on durables, residential construction, commercial construction, and capital spending, they account for about 20% of GDP, but they account for over 100% of the drop during a recession. And we really haven't had a boom in any of them. So that makes this cycle a little bit different. I think that what's likely to come of that is that the cycle will likely last longer. We have the next recession in 2021 or later. June will mark the 10th anniversary of the business expansion. So we should blow through the previous record by a considerable margin.
When I started on the fixed income trading floor, one of the things that we tried to do with our economic reports was to find the things in the reports that were being overlooked. And in the employment report, this past employment report was a great example. We had 263,000 jobs. Wage growth was modest, and the unemployment rate fell. What on earth could have happened? How did we get these strong jobs? And I was amazed that nobody saw this in the numbers. What boosted the employment numbers in April was the floods in Nebraska and Iowa.
Well, I think that there's no substitute for hard work. I mean, that is, and you say that, and people say, God, is that really this? What does that really mean? But what you see, and you see it even when you're in college, when you see people that say, is this going to be on the test? I mean, when I see those people in the real work world, they're not very good, because they're always trying to figure out how to do the absolute minimum. I think my advice to someone just starting out is always do above and beyond what you're asked to do, and to spend a lot of time learning how to do things better and how to understand things better. I tell people that the economy is like a puzzle that you're never going to completely solve. But the way that you attack that is you start with the pieces that you can define around. You start with the edges and you start working your way in. And so if you focus on the parts that you do understand and then just constantly try to expand that base of knowledge, you're going to do really, really well.